God bless you.
Well done, John. You did it in 41 minutes. So, Yusuf, you have 41 minutes. If I can have your attention, that'll be a great help. I'm going to ask David Seckham, who introduced Reverend Dr. John Azuma to us. I'm going to ask David to introduce Yusuf to us, and then it'll be over to...
It was in 2008 at an exchange of views between Muslims and Christians in Cape Town that I first met Yusuf Ismail, and I recognized him as a scholar of note. Yusuf gave a very insightful and interesting address where it became clear that he'd read a lot of Christian theologians that I'd never read, and understood what they were saying. He's extremely well read in matters of Christian theology as well as many other things. Yusuf then chaired a debate at the University of Cape Town in 2009, at which Shabir Ali, a noted Islamic scholar from Canada, Shabir Ali and myself spoke to the subject, did Jesus really die and rise from the dead? That debate drew a crowd of about 1,200 Christians and Muslims. It was a very exciting time. Last year we met again at Sea Point Civic Centre. The subject was, is the New Testament the Word of God? And all of these exchanges have been extremely friendly and informative, and explain why Yusuf was my first choice for tonight's exchange. Yusuf Ismail grew up in Durban, born and bred there, although his mother's family tells me are Johannesburgers. He took his degree in commerce from the University of Durban, Westville, and his LLB, his law degree, from the University of Natal. At various times he's been an advocate and attorney. I'm very confused about these things. We have solicitors and barristers where I come from, and I'm not too sure what an advocate or an attorney is, but it fits in there somewhere. He is presently the head of the Interfaith Department of the Islamic Propagation Centre International here in South Africa. His particular interests, he speaks a lot, he debates a lot, the relevance of Christianity and Islam in 21st century, the challenge of secularism, and subjects like this. Ladies and gentlemen, will you please welcome Yusuf Ismail.
Good evening. I greet you in the name of peace, as the prophets of old would say, Shalom Alaikum, or in Arabic, Assalamu Alaikum. It simply means, may the peace and blessings of God Almighty be upon all of you. It's quite interesting to note that just exactly 2 weeks ago, I happened to, I see my good colleague John, in fact, tells me he was in Birmingham, but I actually met his doctoral advisor from the University of Birmingham, Dr. Jabal M. Bouaben. Is that correct? And we had an interesting discussion. It was just by coincidence that we met up. I never knew that he had known Dr. John Azuma. He had come with students doing some kind of research in Durban, and we started chatting, and it so happened that he happened to be his doctoral advisor, and here we are this evening. I want to first thank this church, thank the hospitality of Martin Morrison, of Dr. David Seckham, of John Azuma, and as a token of my appreciation, I'd like to hand simple gifts. And of course, for Bishop Martin, and of course for David Seckham. Thank you. Okay, thank you. Now, I tend to get a bit long-winded, so if any of you are bored, just simply yawn and I will stop the discussion. Yeah, let's start with the discussion. Firstly, the topic, quite interesting. Why Christian, why Muslim, which was first initially proposed by Dr. Seckham. To unpack this idea, and certainly we've advertised the same topic, and I put the primer on top of it called the politics of identity, because at the end of the day we are dealing with the issues of identity, where we stand. Now, I'm going to approach the subject not in the similar fashion that John did, but I'm going to take a different perspective entirely in terms of where I'll be engaging in a certain degree of analysis. I do understand that this is not a debate per se, so I'm not going to engage in any kind of deconstruction per se, as we've done in the past. I think at the outset, why Christian, why Muslim? It boils down to the issue of analyzing religion. And in a general sense, what we do understand is that religion per se can be defined as the belief and the worship of a god or gods, or a set of beliefs concerning the origins and the purpose of the universe. Now, in a sense, in many respects, it is regarded as consisting of a person's relationship to God, or to gods, or the spirits. And of course, many religions would take the particular style, narratives, symbols, traditions, based on their specific idiosyncrasies. They tend to derive morality, ethics, law, or preferred lifestyle from the ideas of the cosmos. Therefore, you find all these categories of religions. Sometimes, of course, religion is used interchangeably with faith or belief system. But in many instances, it's more than just simply a private belief system, and has a public aspect. And so many religions have organized behaviors, congregations, and structures. Academics studying religion have defined it into three main categories. The world religions, which obviously refer to the transnational faiths, Judaism, Christianity, Hinduism, Buddhism, etc. Indigenous religions, which refer to smaller culture-specific religious movements, and of course new religious movements like the New Age movements, where people are upset with religious traditions and they're going the different route. So now you have Zen Buddhism, you have the philosophy of Deepak Chopra, you have all these different kinds of spirituality, because organized religion in a sense has failed. And of course the development of religion has taken different forms in different cultures. Max Muller, the renowned scholar in the 19th century, stated that the word religion comes from the Latin word religio, originally referring to the reverence of the gods, or careful pondering of divine things. So at the outset, what I want to emphasize is this, that religion per se is an artificial construct. That terminology is something which is a modern phenomenon, and in fact, in past, what people would have called, what we call religion today, in the past they would have simply described it as a law or a lifestyle or way of being. Now, in the comparative study of religions, in order to make an informed decision, one finds that certain classifications are used. For example, you'd find polytheism, which could be used to describe, as you've seen a picture of Zeus, the ancient Greek god, or Hinduism, or Zoroastrianism, many of the pagan religions. Then you find an idea called monotheism, which is strictly speaking Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. And of course you have pantheism, in which the universe is identified with God. So the question is, we need to make an informed decision. In many respects, some would argue that Christianity would not strictly constitute monotheism per se, but that's another debate. We're at crossroads, faith and reason. Can we simply reduce religion to a category in terms of which we can then make an informed choice, like going into a supermarket? Because if I were to ask the question, as the question is posed tonight, why Christian, why Muslim? These questions raise a number of presuppositions. And the presuppositions, in many respects, from a Muslim point of view, is that it would categorize Islam, and by implication Muslim, within the broad basket-like category of world religions. Like you go into a supermarket and you see different brands, and then you simply decide to choose which brand suits you. Sometimes you choose your brands based on fear, as in this website, godhatesfags.com. God hates you. You're going to hell, so you need to come and join on board. But Or here we have a flow chart to determine what religion you should follow. How many gods do you want to worship? One. How do you feel about bacon? I love bacon. How do you feel about hummus? Maybe you should be a Muslim. Do you want to be reincarnated? No. Well, then you should follow Mayan religion. Yes, perhaps. Do you own a black cat? Maybe you should be a Wiccan. Now, I'm saying, can religion be limited to simply a choice which we choose, like the broad basket-like category of you simply pick and choose what suits you? Or is it something deeper than that? For a Muslim, we would simply submit that it goes beyond. We need to go beyond simply choosing, because Islam cannot be categorized as religion in the conventional sense. And I will unpack it as I go a little later on. The term deen, which is commonly translated as religion, in fact is far more broader. And even the term Islam itself, far more broader than what we would like to understand. Now, I will come to that at a later point, but just to come to the question here, why am I a Muslim? Well, there are two, or I would rather say three fundamental reasons for this. Having examined the world of ideas, none of the systems out there could fulfill or fit my expectations. None of them were universal worldviews. Many of them were limited in the sense of being, in many instances, nationalistic, limited in scope. Having examined Islam itself, I could not resist being a Muslim. Now, let's look at the world of ideas. Firstly, atheism. Could I be an atheist? Well, no, I cannot accept atheism because I believe that there is a God. This can be confirmed, of course, by the fact that we are here, that there is something out of nothing. Scientists have long resisted the idea that the universe had a beginning. In fact, Einstein introduced what he called the cosmological constant to keep the universe from expanding, but the universe kept on expanding, and this expansion led towards the theory of the Big Bang origin. Now, this Big Bang origin, interestingly enough, can be found confirmed in the Quran. In Surah 21 verse 30, you read the expression, "Do not the atheists see that the heavens and the earth were joined together as one unit of creation before we clove them asunder?" And many exegetists will tell you that this, in a sense, can be reconciled with the theory of the Big Bang. How is it possible that someone living in the desert 1400 years ago, an illiterate man, could come up with certain facts? The congruence, the point is that the congruence between the Quranic verse and the Big Bang is inescapable. How could a man living 1400 years in the desert be aware of this particular fact? So, that's one issue. But on the other issue, scientists now, looking at the Big Bang, have calculated from inception the fundamental physical constants that govern physics, which are fine-tuned to be exactly what they are, like matter, like density, like what you see around there. Look at matter. Unless the density of matter is worked out from the beginning at 10 to the minus 43, we wouldn't be here. In other words, the density of matter had to be fine-tuned to allow for no variation, even to the extent of 10 to the minus 49, an infinitesimally small quantity. So if the density of matter is fine-tuned, if it was not fine-tuned, we would not be here. And the fact that it is fine-tuned points to an originator, points to a mathematical mind. And that mathematical mind is the Almighty, the Creator. So I couldn't be an atheist. Now, having identified, and of course I couldn't be an agnostic, following through with that argument. Now, having identified the world of ideas, one discovers that, on the other hand, in contrast to atheism, there are many systems in the world today. Let us look at China. Could I accept any of the Chinese religions? Well, no, I couldn't. Because religion in the Chinese context is festive, celebrating the passage of men and women in the Chinese community through the cycle of life and death. You find, for example, the Confucian system of ethics for public life, the Tao system of rituals, and the Buddhist salvational concepts concerning the afterlife. Now, the point is that all these three systems, all these Chinese religions, are merely complementary to one another and cannot basically operate independently. Moreover, Confucianism being a system of ethics, and ethics already being part of the worldview of Islam, it is not a holistic worldview. So I couldn't accept Confucianism. Could I be a Taoist? Well, no, I couldn't be a Taoist because as far as back as we can see, if we trace the founder of Taoism, according to the Collins Gem Book of World Religions, that the founder of Taoism is a shadowy figure. In other words, it's not a historical personage. And unless we can trace religion to an authentic source, what we would have is a man-made system. So I could not accept the Chinese systems. What about Shinto? Could I be a Shinto? Could I accept the religion which is called Shintoism? Again, I could not be a Shinto because the basis of Shintoism emphasizes the worth and values of being a good Japanese citizen. It's a set of practices. Most of it can be derived from the book called the Kojiki, but by and large, it comprises of disorganized folklore, mythology, history. So it's not a holistic system. It's the culture or the value of being a good Japanese citizen. So I couldn't be a Shinto. Traveling backwards east, we look at the religions of India. Could I be a Hindu? Well, my forefathers, interestingly enough, were all Hindus. But could I be a Hindu today? No, I could not be a Hindu. Why not? Because Hinduism also is an amorphous concept. It's an amorphous concept. It's a label, a title, which was, some scholars would say, invented by the British to describe an amorphous category of belief systems, some of which would incorporate phallic worship, some of which would incorporate the worship of nature, animal worship, pagan worship. This could not fulfill my expectations. In fact, one individual who was dissatisfied with Hinduism was an individual called Siddhartha Gautama, who was a Hindu. He was dissatisfied with Hinduism, and so he founded his own religion. And in his own religion, he enumerated 4 noble truths and an 8-fold path to achieve these truths, that is to attain unification with the eternal consciousness, this Brahma. You immerse yourself with the Brahma. Now, when we analyze this, we also see that this is a Hindu concept. We need to ask ourselves, where is the evidence for the universal soul? If Hinduism cannot fulfill our expectations, then what makes Buddhism fulfill our expectations? We don't know. Sometimes people feel that they are so immersed with the divine consciousness that they sometimes can perform acrobatics. Maybe that's an example of the universal soul. I don't want to sound mockery here, but in many respects we find practices, cultures, in most instances, these are subjective experiences. And so, since these are subjective, they cannot be analyzed, they don't fulfill my expectation. This is another example, a subjective experience of Sacha Baron Cohen in a Pentecostal church in the United States. If you saw the movie Borat, you'll probably be familiar with what I'm talking about. Now, so I couldn't accept, so I'm a Muslim because I could not accept any of the Oriental religions. I'm a Muslim because I could not accept the religions of India. To find a faith which has some basis in revelation, we have to travel to the Middle East. And there we find Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Well, could I be a Jew? Well, no, I could not be a Jew, because to be a Jew, one has to be born into the system. Judaism, you see, can refer to the religion or to the social and cultural identity. Insofar as Judaism refers to the social and cultural identity, I obviously cannot be a Jew. If it refers to the religion of Moses, then obviously it has a revelation which has as its basis as coming from God. The Quran states that Moses received revelation, that Moses was a prophet of God, that Moses received the same message, in essence, that was sent to all the prophets, and the Quran would describe it as the Torah. But the question is, do we have the Torah as was revealed to Moses? I don't think so. But if yes, of course, that would commend us to believe in it. But do we have that Torah? At the present point in time, I don't think we do have the original Torah. And this is not a subjective view, but Bible commentaries and scholars unabashedly state that the 5 books, the Pentateuch, were written several centuries after Moses, 600 years after him. Now, if that is the case, and there's good evidence to support that this is the case, then we no longer have the religion as was originally revealed to Moses. You'd find the Levitical laws. We have a religion known as Judaism, which owes its origins to the ideas of priests and scribes who wrote these books and these various laws, like the Levitical laws. Further on, one would find that Judaism is a label. Some scholar once gave the example. He said that the word Judaism was an unknown to Moses, but it comes from the word Judah, which in turn is a derivative of Yahuda. the story goes is that the children of Judah were sojourning, and they traveled from one land to the next, and until they settled in a place which was called Judea. And people on the outside stated that the religion followed by the children of Judah in Judea is Judaism. So can you see, it's a label. It's a label which was invented at a later time. It was not known to Moses. Further on, and I don't propose to go any further into this, but the oldest Hebrew manuscript, which is the Masoretic text, dates from the 10th century of the Common Era. That is about 1,000 years after Jesus, and probably 4,000 to 5,000 years after Moses. So I could not be a Jew. Could I be a Christian? Well, in one sense, yes, I can be a Christian, and I could proudly state I'm a Christian if by Christian you simply mean one who follows Christ, one who imitates Christ. We believe that Jesus was one of the mightiest messengers of God, that he was the Messiah, that he gave life back to the dead by God's permission, that he was born miraculously, which many modern day Christians, like the Anglican bishops, do not accept. If by Christian you mean that, well then I'm happy to say I'm a Christian. But in the conventional understanding of Christian, I cannot be a Christian. Because firstly, the term itself is also a label. Jesus himself never heard the term Christian. Jesus never heard the term Christ. Jesus never heard the term Jesus. In fact, in Acts chapter 11 verse 26, the Acts of the Apostles, for the very first time you find the disciples of Jesus called Christians. By the enemies, they said, these are Christians, referring to them either as followers of Christ or as worshippers of Christ. So it was not a label, he used it, it was a label given by the enemies in Antioch. Looking at the Gospels, what we clearly see that Jesus was a sincere prophet, he was a messenger, he was a man who was sincere in what he said. Preaching could cost him his life. It was clearly dangerous stuff since he was against the religious establishment. In John 8:40 you read the expression, Jesus says, you have determined to kill me, a man who spoke to you the truth. Now what we do know is that Jesus was preaching a revealed message from God. The Quran identifies us as Injil. I see John in his discussion says that that gospel was Jesus. And so he says the gospel according to Matthew, which would mean Jesus according to Matthew, Jesus according to Mark, Jesus according to Luke. Meaning Jesus, or the life of Jesus, as articulated by these particular gospel writers. But now, if these Gospels are the primary material for the life of Jesus, or for the Gospel which you say is Jesus, we find that they were written long after Jesus. The earliest, according to most biblical scholars, Mark was written about in the year AD 70, about 40 years after Jesus left the scene. In the 40 years after he left the scene, his words circulated obviously by word of mouth. There were no recollections of anyone memorizing the statements exactly as he spoke them. You see, if people had memorized the statements, then we would have had some degree of consistency in respect of the prominent sayings of Jesus. For example, the Lord's Prayer. The Lord's Prayer in Matthew and Luke, if you compare the two, you'd find significant variations between the two. I'm not saying that places an indictment on the Lord's Prayer or that makes the Lord's Prayer bad. I'm not saying that at all. But what I'm saying is that if anyone bothered to memorize just the single prayer, then throughout the world we would find a situation where people would be reciting the Lord's Prayer uniformly. But we find the significant variations from Matthew and Luke just on this particular prayer shows us that no one memorized his preaching, nor were his revelations properly recorded. The words which appear in the text cannot of certainty be said to him, and so what scholars would do is that through a process called textual criticism, they'd reconstruct the New Testament. And of course from that we would see that Jesus would be a wise man, a sage, a prophet of God. So in a sense, I could not be a Christian in the conventional sense, because Christianity as a religion survived as a religion about Jesus as opposed to one coming from Jesus. I don't purport to discuss the historicity of the Gospels, but by and large, most scholars in the broader category of mainstream biblical scholarship accept or concede the idea that the works are anonymous, sometimes pseudonymous writings by third or fourth generation writers. And so therefore Christianity could not fulfill my particular expectations. I couldn't be a Christian. Of course, we could talk about the synoptic problem, the fact that Matthew and Luke both made use of Mark, and of course what some source called the hypothetical source of Jesus saying called Q, but I'm not going to deal with it any further. This, in a broad sense, is the mainstream Christian scholarly perspective on the relationship between the synoptic gospels, where you find certain percentages, the triple tradition between Mark, Luke and Matthew, passages unique to Luke, passages unique to Matthew, and of course the double tradition, and passages of course solely unique to the different gospel writers. So I couldn't be a Christian for these particular reasons. But this does not detract from the point that I can pick up aspects in the gospels which are of relevance in today's time, in today's society, of good living, ethics, morality, having an ethical paradigm. In fact, by and large, the Gospels, or the life of Jesus, as you'd find enumerated in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, would, by and large, in many respects, parallel Islamic teachings. The fact that the idea of the divinity of Christ cannot be spelt up in the Gospels. The fact that Jesus himself never claimed to be divinity, divine, or that he claimed to be God, or claimed any divine title for this. Of course, my friend John spoke about the fact that he didn't want to claim this title, but there's no evidence for that in the Gospels. And so far as it coincides with the Islamic terminology or Islamic belief, I would have no problem with it. But still, we're not dealing with an authentic body of work. So I could not be a Christian. I'm a Muslim because I could not accept any of the Oriental religions. I'm a Muslim because I could not accept any of the religions in East. I'm a Muslim because I could not accept any of the religions in India. I'm a Muslim because I could not be a Jew. I'm a Muslim because I could not be a Christian. I'm a Muslim because, having examined Islam itself, I could not resist being a Muslim. Now, let's unpack this, because many people generally don't understand what Islam is. Is Islam a religion amongst religions where you simply choose? You pick and choose like you go into a supermarket. Pick the best brand. Firstly, the word Islam is derived from the word salama or slim, which simply means submission, surrender. In a broad category, it simply means peace acquired through submission to the will of God. One who submits his will to the will of God is a Muslim. When the contemporaries, during the time of the Prophet Muhammad, heard the term Islam and they heard the term Muslim, they never understood it in the narrow, limited, historically circumscribed sense that we would understand it today. But rather they would understand it in the broadest connotation of denoting man's self-surrender to the will of God. Every other religion we would find would be named after a person or persons. Christian after Christ, Judaism after Judah, Buddhism after Buddha, Hinduism after the land of Hind, the Indus Valley. So it's an artificial construct, but Islam is not that. The term itself is generic. It's interesting enough that if you look at Surah 3 verse 67 and Surah 3 verse 52, there you find a passage about Abraham being neither a Jew nor a Christian, but he was of those who submitted his will to the will of God. And the word in Arabic is kana musliman. So in other words, if one were to transliterate the passage as opposed to translating it, Abraham would be described as a Muslim. In Surah 3 verse 52, when Jesus asked his disciples, who will be my helpers, who will assist me on my mission? The disciples say, bear thou witness that we will assist you, and bear thou witness that we surrender our will to the will of God. And the word in Arabic, which has been translated, is bi'anna muslimun. In other words, if one were to transliterate it as opposed to translating it, the disciples of Jesus would be saying, bear thou witness that we are Muslims. It doesn't mean that they understood the Arabic term. So the point is that the Islamic belief is that Abraham was a Muslim, Solomon was a Muslim, David was a Muslim, Jesus was a Muslim, and the faith or the religion in conventional sense which they preached was Islam. If one were to look at a practical demonstration on this, in Matthew 26 verse 39, you read the expression, in the Garden of Gethsemane, at the last point, when Jesus went a little further, and he fell on his face, and prayed to God, and said, "O my Father, if it be possible, let this cup pass away from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as thou wilt. In other words, Jesus submitting his will to the will of God. Or even in the Lord's Prayer, Our Father which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. And the interesting part is, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Your will, the will of God, and your submission to the will of God basically renders you a Muslim. So as one could say in the broadest possible sense, that if you look at the studies of anthropologists, or you look at the studies of sociologists, and you go and analyze, when they analyzed the studies or conducted studies on people like the Kopaku tribes of Papua who never met civilized man till the 1920s, or they looked at the studies of the Aboriginal tribes of Australia, and they went to analyze and see what did these people believe before someone came and told them what to believe, you will see that it is Islam in everything but name. They don't speak Arabic, they don't say Muslim, but the faith is one. God is one. He has no children, he's not subjected to the sensory perceptions as we as individual humans are, but the faith is essentially the same. Prior, in the psyche, in the inner recesses of the human, you are submitting your will to the will of God. And so Islam, to categorize it as a category amongst a category of religions, would be incorrect, because the term is generic and the term refers to the surrendering one's will to the will of God in the ultimate sense. That claim cannot be made of any other religion. Most of the religions, and even the terminologies, if we're talking or arguing about terminologies, why Christian, why Muslim, that same claim cannot be made for the term Christian. The term Christian wasn't nationalized. It was a localized term, a term which evolved in a particular context. The same cannot be said for the term Muslim or the term Islam. Of course, conventionally, we call us Muslim, Christian, etc. But in the broader sense, if you look at the Quran, it's far deeper than what people would normally understand. So according to the Holy Quran, God is the Lord of the worlds. He has not discriminated between the nations. He has raised prophets and his message amongst all the nations of the world. And this was a message of peace acquired through submission to God's will. If you look at the passage again, which speaks about the universalized content of the message, you'd look at Surah 10 verse 57, Surah 25 verse 4, Surah, I think 53 verse 13. To every people have we sent an apostle. Verily, we have sent thee, O Muhammad, in truth, as a bearer of glad tidings and a warner. And in Arabic, وَإِن مِّنْ أُمَّةٍ إِلَّا خُلَا فِيهَا نَذِيرٌ. And there never was a people without a warner having lived amongst them. The same religion has he established for you, as that we have enjoined on Noah, that which we have sent by revelation to thee, Muhammad, and that which we enjoined on Abraham, Moses, and Jesus. So you should remain steadfast in faith and make no divisions therein. So in a sense, the Prophet Muhammad had come to complete. It was not a new religion. And so we're now saying you need to follow this new religion, this new cult, this new political party. Don't vote for the National Party, you come and vote for the ANC. It's not that. It wasn't a new system that propped up. It was simply the continuation that in the evolution of world religions, Islam is the culmination, the fulfillment of the teachings of Moses, Jesus, and all the other prophets brought into one. That is the Islamic belief. And of course, having come to complete, not to destroy or controvert the work of the earlier prophets, you'd read in Surah 3, 2 verse 136, say yea, we believe in God and the revelation given to us and to Abraham, Ishmael, Isaac, Jacob and the tribes, and that given to Moses and Jesus. And that given to all the prophets from our Lord, we make no difference between one and another, and we bow to God in Islam. Now, the point is that when I were to, if I were to look at the Gospels as they stand, and this is not a point for debate, but in a general sense, the Islamic perspective is that the Christianity of Jesus Christ, or the faith or the message of Jesus, although I accept it, it was not meant to be a universal religion. Though as far as its fundamental message and teachings were concerned, the religion of Jesus was not different from Islam, yet it did not contain that element of complete guidance for all aspects of human life and for all nations and ages. And Jesus himself says that his message was localized. He says, I am not sent but unto the lost sheep of the house of Israel, in Matthew 25:24. In Matthew 10, verse 5 to 6, go not into the way of the Gentiles, and when he said with the Samaritans, enter ye not, but go ye rather unto the lost sheep of the house of Israel. So it was a localized, in fact, Jesus was one of those national prophets. As Dr. C.J. Kadu, an author who states that the office of the Messiahship, with which Jesus believed himself to be invested, marked him out for a distinctly national role. And accordingly, we find him more or less confining his preaching and healing ministry and that of his disciples to Jewish territory. As in the instance where you find, for example, he's hesitant on one occasion where he was asked to heal a Gentile girl. He said, do not take the children's bread and give it to them. So it was a localized message. But our belief, and certainly from the Quranic perspective, one would find indication, with apologies to Universal Studios, that the message of Islam, in fact, is universal. It basically unpacks it. It says that. In Surah 21, verse 107, we have not sent thee, O Muhammad, but as a mercy unto all nations. Say, in others, God telling, O Muhammad, O men, say Muhammad, I am sent unto you all as the apostle of God, to whom belongeth the dominion of the heavens and the earth. There is no God but He. So there is nothing in Islam. So basically, in a sense, there is nothing in Islam of significance or benefit only to a people of a particular region or age. But the Holy Quran enjoins nothing which is not uniformly inspiring to people of all lands, and of course provides guidance to people in all stages of a changing and advancing society. That same thing cannot be said for Christianity. Even if one looks at Judaism, for example, one would find the fact that the idea or the idea of the chosen people, the Jews or the children of Israel being a chosen people, that doesn't find resonance in the Islamic belief. Islam says, in contrast to the idea of the chosen people, that it would be a denial of the universal providence of God to assert that prophets were raised in one nation only. If God is not partial with regards to His material blessings, rain, food, shelter, why should He then be partial with regards to His spiritual blessings? And the answer is that He has not been partial. And so there is not a nation on earth that has not from some time immemorial received some kind of guidance from God. Of course, that kind of guidance can develop and evolve and change based on the context and based on the idiosyncrasies. In conclusion on that point, Islam would view itself as the consummation of all the earlier scriptures. By accepting the prophets and scriptures of all nations, Islam affirms the unity and universal providence of God and the universality of religious experience and of truth. How much time do I have? 8 minutes. I've got about 20 minutes to give. It's a pity. So Islam and not Christianity, we would say, would give complete guidance for all aspects and for all things to come. The Prophet Muhammad himself also universalized the content of the teachings of the earlier prophets by cutting out those aspects or those elements which were basically particularistic of a significant value. He highlighted the universal significance. On the other hand, as I've mentioned, Jesus' message was limited to a particular time and a specific context. Now let's look at certain elements. Let us compare certain aspects of the religions of the past and of contemporary faiths and compare it to Islam, and why we see that Islam is a final message, and one of the reasons why I cannot help not being a Muslim. One of the contentious issues, the status of women in other religions and Islam. If one has to look at 1883, we read the expression that women had no separate identity, no legal status in the Christian West. In England, which was the most advanced country, up until the 1st of January 1883, it was true to state that as a general rule, the contract of a married woman was void. She could not sue or be sued apart from her husband. The Married Woman's Property Act gave her the right to possess limited property in her own name and was passed as late as England in 1882. In fact, even in South Africa up until 1984, in a technical sense, married women were regarded as children. But when we turn to Islam, we find that the Holy Quran, for example, at the very outset, from its beginning, from its inception, clears woman of the responsibility for the fall of Adam, for example, and would vindicate her honor and dignity. It says in Surah 3, in Surah 2, verse 228, and women shall have rights similar to the rights of men over them according to what is equitable. If you look at other passages, other elements within the Islamic worldview, the right and duty to obtain an education, the right to have their own independent property and inherit, the right to work to earn money if they need or want it, equality of reward for equal deeds, which John interestingly has dealt with in his book, My Neighbor's Faith, the right to express their opinion and be heard, the right to negotiate marriage terms of choice, the right to divorce, the right to custody, even the right to leadership in society. It's quite interesting that even though you find that the status of Muslim women in a significant number of Muslim countries are by and large compromised, most of the countries that have had female leaders have happened to be Muslim countries. You look at Indonesia, you look at Bangladesh, you look at a country as conservative as Pakistan. So you find that that discrimination, that patriarchal attitude, which you find existent in other religious traditions, are not present in the Islamic text or the source material. Therefore, I could not find the other religions fulfilling my expectations. What about something like slavery? What about slavery? Do we find anything in any of the other religions leading to an emancipation of slaves or even an improvement of their particular lot? In fact, and I use this term loosely, but I'm not saying Christians as in all of you sitting here, but conventional Western Christianity failed to utterly abolish the idea of slavery or European society or any of its particular evils. In fact, in the southern states of North America, the cruelest types of inhumanities upon the unfortunate beings were basically practiced. So that inherent enslavement of humanity has never been done away with by any other religious tradition. But the first religion or the first system to improve the condition of slaves was the Islamic system. In Surah, I think it's Surah 56, XC, verses 12 to 17. What will explain to thee the path that is steep? It is the liberation of slaves and the giving of food in the day of privation to the orphan with claims of relationship, or the indigent down in the dust. In Surah 2 verse 177, it is not righteousness that you turn your faces towards the east or the west, but righteousness to believe in God in the last day, etc., etc. And one of the conditions and prerequisites for righteousness is the ransoming of slaves, the liberation of slaves. I don't find that kind of liberation in any of the other religious traditions. Again, Surah 58 verse 2 to 4, if you commit a sin, you engage in some kind of domestic violence, free a captive before you engage or reconcile with each other. The Prophet himself ruled that for certain sins of omission and commission, the offender could be pardoned if he gave freedom to slaves. He said in Sahih Bukhari, if one of you has a slave girl whom he gives a good education and excellent training, and then emancipates her and marries her, he shall have a twofold reward from God. Now, God has spoken to me, the Prophet here, again, this is not the Quran but in the traditions. There are three classes of person whose adversary I shall be on the day of judgment. One of them is an individual who enslaves a man, sells him and eats his price. So even though Muslims, and you talk about the Arab slave trade that subsequently took place, the kind of slavery that flourished under the Atlantic slave trade, particularly in America, was absolutely unknown among Muslims, because Islam, in a sense, raised the status of slaves. So where it did not abolish slavery, harmonized the relationship insofar as the relationship of the slave was raised to the status of a servant. So you'd have a servant relationship. What about the political constitution? Islam does not only aim at transforming the character of the individual and guiding him in his private life, but it also seeks to build a social order upon the principles of equality, justice and peace. Whilst Christianity, Wilfred Cantwell Smith has said, has in recent years moved towards being a social gospel, Islam has been a social gospel from inception. So even though Christianity does give some guidance with regards to what Aristotle described as private virtues, it's absolutely silent on the question of political virtues. And so the result of the separation of religion and politics in Christianity has been the growth of Machiavellism in the West. Islam, on the other hand, being the last revealed faith and foreseeing the eventual evolution of humanity, had to formulate a basic code of comprehensive guidance for mankind on all and other aspects. And one could go on. The economics of Islam, religious freedom, let there be no compulsion in religion, for truth stands out distinct from falsehood. That's an eternal standard. It's not abrogated. It stands today, it'll stand 100 years from now. Knowledge and science. After a careful study of the histories of Islam and other faiths, Canon Isaac Taylor came to the conclusion that Islam has done more for civilization than any other religious tradition. And so, whilst the Muslims rose to the pinnacle of learning and culture in a few decades after the promulgation of Islam, people in the West remained steeped in ignorance for more than 1,000 years. It's a fact that the people of Europe came out of the Dark Ages and made progress in science and learning only after the whole of the church considerably declined. But in a sense, that Renaissance was by and large as a result of Muslim studies, of Muslim research, and of course expanding the concept and the idea of knowledge. So the Holy Quran, in a sense, contains repeated exhortations for believers to observe the phenomenon of nature and investigate. Surah 49 verse 13, you read the expression, O mankind, Ya ayyuhan nas, we created you from a single pair and made you into nations and tribes that you may recognize each other, not that you may despise each other. The most exalted of you in the sight of God is he who is most righteous in conduct. Therefore, in the last sermon, the Prophet said, no Arab has superiority over any other non-Arab, and no non-Arab has any superiority over an Arab. No black over white, or white over black. The criterion of superiority in the sight of God is righteousness, moral integrity, and correct belief. And so therefore Arnold Toynbee, the noted writer, concluded that the extinction of race consciousness as between Muslims is one of the outstanding achievements of Islam, and in the contemporary world there is, as it happens, a crying need for the propagation of this Islamic virtue. I want to leave you with one point, and since we've looked at Gospel of John, I don't want to take any further time on that, but interestingly enough, since John has quoted the Gospel of John, there's an interesting passage in the Gospel. There's an interesting passage in the Gospel of John where Jesus tells his disciples, he says, I have yet many things to say unto you, but you cannot bear them now. God had given Jesus guidance to guide mankind until doomsday, but the people around him, the contemporaries, they were not fit to receive the message. So he says, I have yet many things to say unto you, but you cannot bear them now. Howbeit, when he, the Spirit of truth, shall come, he will guide you unto all truth. For he shall not speak from himself, but what things soever shall he hear, that shall he speak. And he will declare unto you the things that are to come. He shall glorify me. Now we Muslims would say that that Spirit of truth is the Prophet Muhammad. And you ask me how? John uses the term Spirit and Prophet interchangeably, and I'll close on this point. He says, Beloved, believeth not every spirit, but try the spirits whether they are of God, because many false prophets have gone out into the world. In other words, a true spirit is a true prophet, and a false spirit is a false prophet. How then should you determine whether the spirit or that prophet is of God? He says every spirit, meaning every prophet, that confesses that Jesus is the Christ is of God. And you simply apply the test. The Muslim and the Christian, the Muslim and the Jew, the Muslim and any other religious tradition, Islam is the only non-Christian faith which claims to accept Jesus as one of the mightiest messengers of God. We believe that he was born miraculously, which many modern day bishops do not accept. So it's a fulfillment. And Islam would claim to have guidance for humanity forever. So in the end, what we could say is that Islam, I'm a Muslim because I believe it is a true religion of Jesus himself, revived by a fresh revelation and perfected to cover all aspects of human relations and actions, and to provide guidance to the people of all times and all nations. In short, it is a universal faith. It does not only respond to man's devotional urges, but to human life as a whole. It is not a solitary star, but a whole solar system, encompassing the whole and, in a sense, illuminating the whole. Therefore, I would say that I'm a Muslim. Thank you, and God bless you.
Thank you, John, and thank you, Yusuf. We are going to take a 5-minute break, just a 5-minute break, and then when we come back, let me tell you what we're going to be doing. 2 things. First of all, Larry King style, David Seckham is going to be asking John and Yusuf some questions, and we'll have them seated here on some bar stools, and they'll be answering his questions, and we'll spend 20-25 minutes doing that, and then we'll open it up to the audience for any questions.